This is the document they thought would be a footnote in history, a quiet handover of a tropical paradise. But this morning, the sun isn't just setting on the British Empire. It's being eclipsed by a geopolitical firestorm that has trapped 10 Downing Street in a corner. Breaking news from the heart of Westminster has confirmed that Sir Keir Starmer's historic Chagos Islands Bill has been abruptly paused, pulled from the order paper in a state of absolute strategic panic. This isn't a scheduled delay. This is a total collapse of a diplomatic front line. As we speak, government whips are reportedly scrambling to contain a rebellion that has moved from the backbenches of Parliament to the Mar-a-Lago dining room. We are talking about the sovereignty of Diego Garcia. We are talking about the unsinkable aircraft carrier of the Indian Ocean. And crucially, we are talking about a multi-billion-pound surrender tax that the British public was never supposed to see the full bill for. Why now? Why has the Teflon Prime Minister suddenly hit a brick wall? Because the political contagion we've been tracking, the return of the Trump doctrine, has claimed its first major international victim. The deal to hand over the Chagos archipelago to Mauritius was predicated on a world where the US would quietly sign off on the lease. But over the last 48 hours, Donald Trump didn't just voice concerns, he effectively declared war on the treaty. Branding the move an act of total weakness and a gift to Beijing, the president-elect has sent a shockwave through the special relationship that Starmer simply cannot ignore. The shield is down. The diplomatic cover is gone. For the first time in modern history, a British government is facing the prospect of being forced to abandon a signed international treaty because of a single post on social media from across the Atlantic. To understand why the government is retreating today, we have to look at the strategic trap that critics say Starmer walked right into. The Chagos Islands, specifically Diego Garcia, aren't just vacation spots. They are the nerve centre for US and UK operations in the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific. For years, the UK maintained that our unquestionable sovereignty was the only thing keeping the base secure. But in a rush for a post-colonial win, the Starmer administration agreed to hand the keys to Mauritius. The catch: Mauritius has deep, multi-billion-dollar economic ties to China. The fear, now echoed by the highest levels of the incoming US administration, is that once the UK cedes control, it's only a matter of time before Chinese security contractors or research vessels start appearing in the buffer zones. The wrecking amendment in the House of Lords was the final straw. Conservative peers, emboldened by the shifting winds in Washington, launched a legislative ambush that caught Number 10 completely off guard. They didn't just debate the bill, they tried to gut it. They demanded a China-proofing clause that would effectively make the treaty impossible to implement. It was a humiliation ritual played out in the halls of power. Starmer, sensing a catastrophic defeat that would signal his weakness to the entire world, chose to pull the bill entirely. He is under siege from his own parliament, his greatest ally, and the growing shadow of Beijing. But what happens to the base if the deal dies? What happens to the billions already promised? Let's talk about the surrender tax. This is the part of the story that keeps the Treasury officials awake at night. Publicly, the government talked about a lease. Privately, reports have surfaced of a staggering financial commitment. We are looking at estimates that suggest British taxpayers could be on the hook for over $3.4 billion over the life of the 99-year lease. Imagine that, paying billions of pounds to rent back land you already own. It's been described as one of the most lopsided real estate deals in history. And in a domestic environment of fiscal black holes and budget cuts, the optics of sending billions to a foreign nation to lease back a military base are politically radioactive. But the crisis moves from the balance sheet to the human soul when you look at the betrayed generation. The Chagosian people, the original inhabitants who were forcibly removed in the 60s and 70s, claim they have been sold out once again. They weren't given a seat at the table. They weren't given a vote on their own future. They are being used as pawns in a high-stakes game of great power chess. The government wants to frame this as decolonization, but the people actually affected call it recolonization by Mauritius. This adds an emotional weight to the political drama that makes the pause feel less like a policy shift and more like a moral failure. So, where does the siege end? It ends at the door of the White House. Starmer is reportedly desperate for a clarification from the Trump transition team, but the silence is deafening. Without US backing, the Chagos deal isn't just a policy, it's a suicide note. If the UK proceeds, they risk a permanent rift with their most important security partner. If they withdraw, they face international legal chaos and a loss of face on the global stage that hasn't been seen since Suez. We are witnessing the final act of a specific type of British diplomacy. Whether Starmer can salvage the treaty or not, the damage to his strongman image is done. The veil of inevitability has been pierced. As we head into next week, watch the House of Commons. Watch for the sudden security reviews. Watch for the frantic calls to Florida. But most importantly, watch the activity in the Indian Ocean. If the China shadow continues to grow, Starmer's personal problems will be the least of our worries. For a Prime Minister who promised stability, the ground is currently shifting beneath his feet. The empire is under siege, and this time, the calls are coming from inside the House. Imagine the scene inside the cabinet room. For months, the narrative was set. Keir Starmer was the adult in the room, the man who would restore international law and clean up the mess of the previous administration. But on the morning of Friday, January 23, 2026, that image didn't just crack, it shattered. The Diego Garcia military base and British Indian Ocean Territory Bill, the crown jewel of Starmer's first-year foreign policy, was unceremoniously yanked from the House of Lords order paper. This wasn't a scheduling conflict. This was a tactical retreat under heavy fire. The Teflon Prime Minister has encountered a force he didn't account for, the Don Roe Doctrine. Across the Atlantic, Donald Trump, the man who once cautiously leaned towards supporting the deal, has performed a total 180-degree pivot that has left Whitehall reeling. In a series of Truth Social blasts that read like a declaration of strategic war, Trump branded the handover of the Chagos Islands an act of total weakness and great stupidity. But here's the kicker that should terrify every British diplomat. He's linking Starmer's surrender in the Indian Ocean to his own escalating demands for the United States to acquire Greenland. In Trump's worldview, if the UK is brilliant enough to give away a vital military fortress for no reason whatsoever, then the US can no longer trust its NATO allies to hold the line. He isn't just criticising a treaty, he is questioning the very foundation of the special relationship. But while the headlines focus on the tweets, the real lethal strike came from within the Palace of Westminster. Enter the Wrecking Amendment. In a move of legislative brilliance, Tory peers, led by the likes of Lord Hannan and bolstered by Kemi Badenoch's secret lobbying of US House Speaker Mike Johnson, flexed their superior numbers in the House of Lords. They didn't just ask for a pause, they demanded a full audit to ensure the deal doesn't breach the original 1966 treaty with the US, which guarantees British sovereignty. They effectively told the Prime Minister, if the Americans don't want this deal, you don't have a deal. The Labour whips realised they didn't have the votes to stop the amendment. Rather than suffer a humiliating public defeat on a Monday morning, they chose to delay the bill. But in politics, a delay during a geopolitical crisis is often just a polite word for a funeral. Now, let's get technical about why this speck of dirt in the ocean is worth a potential cabinet collapse. Diego Garcia is known to the US Navy as the footprint of freedom. It is one of the only places on Earth where the US can reload nuclear submarines, launch B-2 stealth bombers, and manage Space Force operations, all while being protected by thousands of miles of open ocean. It is the unsinkable aircraft carrier. Under Starmer's deal, the UK would cede sovereignty to Mauritius, but lease back the base for 99 years. But here is the China shadow that the government tried to hide. Mauritius is not just a neutral island nation. It is a primary partner for Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. Since 2021, Chinese state-linked firms have secured massive contracts for port-adjacent infrastructure in Mauritius. The fear among Trump's defense chiefs is that a 99-year lease is only as good as the government that signs it. If the UK fails to make its rent payments, which some reports suggest could total a staggering $35 billion over the century, Mauritius could technically terminate the lease. Imagine a scenario where the US military is a subtenant on land controlled by a nation that owes its financial life to Beijing. It is a national security nightmare wrapped in a diplomatic bow. And then there are the forgotten people. In a community hall in Crawley, West Sussex, elderly Chagosians are watching the news with a mixture of hope and fury. These are the people who were banished in the 60s to make way for the base, treated like animals by the colonial administration of the time. Starmer's deal was supposed to be about justice for them, but they claim they were never even consulted. They've watched the Prime Minister passionately defend the sovereignty of Greenland while selling out their homeland to Mauritius, a country many of them have never even visited. To the Chagosians, they are being used as pawns in a game between a Prime Minister desperate for a legacy and a President-elect looking for leverage. They are now supporting a government in exile, begging for the islands to remain British rather than be handed to a Mauritian government they don't trust. So, what happens when the siege reaches its breaking point? Sources inside Number 10 describe the mood as nuclear. Starmer is reportedly trapped between his international law ideology and the brutal reality of the Trump era. If he forces the bill through, he risks the US declaring the base insecure and pulling out, which would destroy the UK's defence posture overnight. If he cancels the deal, he loses the respect of the UN and the international courts, proving he is weak in the face of American pressure. We are witnessing a sovereignty standoff that will define the next decade of British power. The special relationship isn't just being tested, it's being redefined in real time. As we head into February, watch for the security reviews. Watch for the sudden diplomatic missions to Mar-a-Lago. But most importantly, watch the wrecking amendments in the Lords. If the Chagos bill doesn't return to the order paper by spring, it's not just a pause. It's the end of Starmer's Indian Ocean dream. The walls are closing in, the bill is due, and the empire is officially under siege. This isn't just a policy delay, it's a sovereignty breakdown at the highest level. We are now seeing the Greenland quid pro quo and the $35 billion surrender tax come into full view. To understand the sheer magnitude of the panic in Downing Street, we have to look at the Greenland connection. In an extraordinary late-night development, Donald Trump has linked the Chagos handover to his own escalating demand to acquire Greenland. He isn't just calling Starmer stupid for giving away the islands, he's using it as a legal precedent. Trump's logic is brutal. If the United Kingdom can unilaterally surrender a vital military asset to a tiny nation for no reason whatsoever, then the world is officially in a liquidation phase. He's effectively told the British government that their weakness has invited his aggression. He is using Starmer's own treaty as the ultimate national security justification for why the US must now expand its own territory. It is a masterclass in high-stakes leverage, and it has left the UK's foreign policy in a state of absolute paralysis. But the financial contagion is what is really turning the public against this deal. While the government initially touted a net present value of $3.4 billion, opposition leader Kemi Badenoch has just dropped a financial bombshell in the Commons that has sent the tabloids into a frenzy.
She is citing internal projections that suggest the true cost of this surrender. When you factor in the 99-year lease, the front-loaded payments, and the inflation-linked escalator demanded by the new Mauritian Prime Minister, Navin Ramgoolam, could balloon to a staggering $35 billion. Imagine the scene at the Treasury. They are cutting winter fuel payments and raising taxes on farmers, yet they are reportedly preparing to sign a cheque for tens of billions to a country that is openly flirting with Beijing. Ramgoolam hasn't just demanded the money. He's effectively demanded a veto on any extension of the lease beyond the 99-year window. He's taking the money, taking the land, and keeping the UK on a permanent leash. This isn't a treaty. It's a financial hostage situation. The surrender tax has become the ultimate symbol of a government that has lost its fiscal and moral compass. And then there is the secretive architect behind the deal. Questions are now being asked about the role of Jonathan Powell, the government's Chagos envoy. Critics are pointing to his history as a friend of China and asking why the negotiations were accelerated at such a breakneck speed just as the US election cycle was heating up. Was this a midnight deal designed to bypass the incoming Trump administration? The Donroe Doctrine in the Indian Ocean is now clashing with the globalist consensus of the Starmer cabinet. Even the United Nations has entered the fray, but not in the way Starmer expected. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has issued a shock request for the bill not to go forward, citing the total exclusion of the Chagosian people from the process. It is a humiliation ritual on a global scale. Starmer tried to use international law as his shield, but now that very same law is being used as a spear against him. He is being accused of human rights violations by the very institutions he claims to champion. As we head into this weekend, the standoff at Diego Garcia is moving from the courtroom to the barracks. Rumours are swirling of contingency planning between the US military and the UK's Ministry of Defence. If Trump follows through on his threat to veto the deal, the UK could be forced to choose between its legal commitment to Mauritius and its survival-level alliance with Washington. This is the collision of capitalism, the Constitution, and the crash of British influence. Starmer's empire is under siege from the left, the right, and the Atlantic. He is a prime minister who promised stability but has delivered a sovereignty crisis that could end his premiership before it truly begins. The maps are being rewritten, the Teflon is melting, and the sheriff, in the form of Donald Trump, is at the door. Watch for the next Truth Social blast. Watch for the Lords to wreck the bill for good, and watch for the people of Chagos to finally have their say. This is the point where the slow burn of politics turns into a full-blown financial and constitutional explosion. We are now peeling back the layers on a scandal that Whitehall tried to bury under an accountancy trick, but has now been blown wide open by the incoming Trump administration. But why would a British Prime Minister risk his entire international reputation on a deal that seems to benefit everyone except the United Kingdom? To find the answer, we have to look at the man nicknamed the Architect of Surrender, Jonathan Powell. Powell isn't just a diplomat, he was Tony Blair's chief of staff, a man who prides himself on closing the book on colonial history. Reports are now surfacing that Powell accelerated these negotiations in a frantic 3-month sprint. Why the rush? Because the Biden administration was reportedly desperate to lock this deal in before the 2024 election, fearing that a returning Donald Trump would view it as a strategic catastrophe. Starmer didn't just walk into a trap, he helped build it, rushing through a treaty that safeguards the base on paper, but leaves the sovereignty in the hands of a nation that is rapidly becoming a financial client state of Beijing. Now let's talk about the money, the real raw numbers that the government tried to hide with a social time preference rate calculation. Starmer told the public the deal would cost $3.4 billion. It sounds like a lot, but in the context of a 100-year defense budget, it was presented as minor. But thanks to a Freedom of Information request to the Government Actuaries Department, the mask has slipped. The actual nominal cost being handed to Mauritius is a mind-blowing $35 billion. Some independent analysts, like the Taxpayers Alliance, suggest that with inflation and running costs, the bill could climb as high as $47 billion. Imagine the betrayal felt by the British public. While the government claims the cupboard is bare for pensioners and farmers, they have signed a secret cheque for tens of billions to a foreign power. It is being called the Great Chagos Cover-Up. Ministers are facing accusations in the Commons that they intentionally used an accountancy trick to downplay the cost by 10 times its actual value. This isn't just a policy failure, it's a fiscal scandal that threatens to bankrupt the trust of the electorate. But the Trump factor has added a layer of humiliation that no one in number 10 saw coming. Trump didn't just stop at calling the deal stupid. He has explicitly linked it to his demand for Greenland. His logic is a direct attack on British prestige. If our brilliant NATO ally is currently planning to give away Diego Garcia for no reason whatsoever, then the US has no choice but to secure its own interests elsewhere. He is using Starmer's perceived weakness as his own national security justification for a global land grab. The Secret Service and the Pentagon are reportedly aghast at the deal, with senior advisors calling Diego Garcia the most important island on the planet. They see a future where the US military is a guest on an island where the landlord, Mauritius, has a renminbi clearing arrangement with the Bank of China. In this environment, every move the US makes is visible to Beijing's financial and intelligence sensors. The unsinkable aircraft carrier is being turned into a glass house. This is why the immediate pause in the House of Lords is so significant. It's not just a delay, it's a sovereignty standstill. The Conservative Party, led by Priti Patel and Kemi Badenoch, has realised that they don't need to win a vote to kill the bill. They just need to let Donald Trump keep talking. Every Truth Social post from Mar-a-Lago acts like a wrecking ball to the Labour government's legislative agenda. Starmer is now in a position where if he ratifies the treaty, he is effectively declaring diplomatic war on the next President of the United States. If he doesn't, he is admitting that the UK is no longer a sovereign power, but a client state that takes its orders from a social media feed in Florida. As we watch this empire under siege, the question is no longer about a few islands in the Indian Ocean. It's about whether the special relationship can survive a prime minister who is viewed by the incoming US administration as a strategic liability. The walls aren't just being breached, the foundation is cracking. Watch the bank transfers. Watch the renminbi clearing in Port Louis, and watch the Greenland tariffs. The bill for the Chagos surrender is coming due, and it's going to cost Keir Starmer everything.